Right, Chevre, welcome, Bruchim Abayim. Rabbi Craig Morantz, if we haven't met before. I see Alicia Sullivan. Welcome, I hope you're well. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. And Ben, of course, I'm glad you're here. Joy, glad you can make it. Cassandra, thank you for being our tech captain today. And Devorah, of course, kind of see you always, Devorah. By the end, you don't have to recommend you for like rabbinic ordination. So, alrighty, let us bless. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, sovereign over time and space, who makes us holy with commandments, commands us to engage in the study of Torah. Today, we're going to look at a life of meaning, and we're going to open up a conversation about Reform theology, how we might think of God in a Reform fashion. We're going to look at the work of Michael A. Meyer, who is an esteemed professor at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati. And we've got a slide that I'll show you a picture of Dr. Meyer. And but first, I want to pull up the materials. Let's see. That's not it. Hang on. Let's see, where'd it go? Oh, I see the problem. Okay, here we go. All righty. Can you see my shared screen? Yeah? Perfect. So the book upon which we're basing our study is entitled A Life of Meaning, Reform Judaism, or Embracing Reform Judaism's Sacred Path. It's edited by Rabbi Dana Evan Kaplan. And we're going to explore, by way of review, something we learned about Rabbi Kaplan's perspectives from last time. We'll also look at a perspective from Rabbi Fox, whom we learned about last time, who wrote the foreword to this really fine volume. It's a large volume, actually. There's some 50 or 60 chapters in it. And the chapters are divided up into 6 categories. And the way it will work going forward is that each class will focus on a different category and a different author. And we will just keep moving forward through this book until it's done. If you'd like to purchase it, I recommend going either to the CCAR website, ccarnet.org, and they have the press, and actually maybe ccarpress.org. And we can put that in the chat box. And or you can go on Amazon. Alrighty. So, is there a question already? Let's see. Oh, Joy will be right back. ccrpress.org. Thank you. All right. So here are the categories.
All right. I'm going to add the Amazon link in the chat box as well. Just
Perfect.
2 seconds.
Thank you, Cassandra. By the way, Cassandra, thank you for captaining us here. If you have questions that you'd like to write in the chat box, or a comment you'd like to write in the chat box, Cassandra's job is to receive those comments and then help me be more aware of their presence so that I can either address them directly or weave them into maybe an answer that I'm giving. She will help me pay attention to you.
So we're not talking. We're to stay on silent.
There will be a chance to talk in a minute. All right. So just as you can see, there's a wide variety of subjects, categories. We will focus on each of them. Today, the category is knowing God, and we'll talk about our covenant, choosing the covenant, spirituality, connecting with the divine, living with the texts, speaking about Torah and the wide body of sacred texts in our tradition. We'll talk about building sacred community, and we'll talk about the dignity of others, recognizing that we are created b'tselem Elohim, in God's image. So those are the categories of the book. It's really a fine volume. So let me move this out of the way so I can actually read the text. So we talked last time in the foreword to A Life of Meaning, this notion that Reform Judaism really is about connecting the past, present, and future in such a way that each cross-fertilizes the other. So in the words of Rabbi Cook, Rabbi Fox reflects on how somehow the ancient quality of our traditions are renewed by virtue of anything that comes around that is new, right? So the new renews the old. And because of that, because the old conveys a certain holiness, because we possess a certain reverence about the past, the new becomes sacred as a result. That said, we reclaim the old in a way because our new perspectives have a way of shifting and transforming the old ideas and refreshing them, renewing them, making them relevant in our lives. So the phrase, by the way, in Hebrew, Hayashan yitchadesh vechachadesh yitkadesh, uttered by the great Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, the first chief rabbi, Ashkenazi chief rabbi in Israel. So moving along, do you see the slide now by Rabbi Kaplan?
No.
No? That's an unfortunate answer. Okay. Let us fix that. Stop share. Okay, let's try this again. How about now? Yes? Do you see slide by Rabbi Kaplan?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank goodness. Devorah, will you read this out loud for us?
If reform is to stay relevant, we need to develop new responses to the new challenges that face us today.
Hello?
Sorry, I had to move the people slide. If reform is to stay relevant, we need to develop new responses to the new challenges that face us today and to the unknown ones that will face us tomorrow. Our guiding principle needs to be that Torah is not the heaven, is in the heavens. It is not beyond the sea, but like our contemporary challenges, it is right here, close to us. It is our covenantal responsibility to undertake the task of interpreting the Jewish religion in the light of who we are today.
Thank you. So I think of the practice of hakafot. Hakafot is when we march around with the Torah so that we can be close to the Torah. Really, the innovation, and it is an innovation, was an innovation, now it's a fairly popular action, very popular ritual. But the practice came about as a way of bringing the Torah down into the masses, if you will, in particular so that children could identify with it, grow connected with it, not be intimidated by it. And so during this happy moment of Hakafah, when we march the Torah around, showing reverence for Seder Kriyat HaTorah, for reading the Torah in the public setting, children grew to identify with this familiar thing called Torah, and as such, felt more comfortable with it. So what Rabbi Kaplan is inviting us to consider is that the Torah is right there. It's in our hands, it's in our hearts, it's in our minds, it's in our actions. It is close, it is not far. It is intimate, it is familiar. And as such, our ability to dive into that familiarity allows us to think deeply about what the Torah says, what it meant in the past, what it means today, what it must mean tomorrow in order to stay relevant. But it's a dynamic process. Dynamic process reflected in a revelation that unfolds over time. While there's an authenticity that infuses Torah because it was a public event, an historic event at Sinai in some shape, way, or form. We learned last week that Isaac Mayer Wise, founder of Reformed Judaism here in America, really believed in the revelation at Sinai. I'm not clear whether he was a literalist about it, but he was very much a believer that Sinai was the moment that belonged to all people, and that there was a transaction, a revelation, an inspiration, maybe even literal. We'll have to look more carefully. But that revelation continues to unfold all these years later, and that is the secret to its success and survival. And that because it's right there for us, because we possess the task of interpreting Torah and finding its relevance in our own time, Torah is therefore dynamic and vibrant because we, in fact, are dynamic and vibrant. The Torah evolves because we, in fact, evolve. Questions, comments? All right. So let us move then to the critical thoughts of Michael A. Meyer. Do you see that slide? Oh, good. So Michael A. Meyer, PhD, is a professor of Jewish history, and he's retired. Served Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion for many years, and is a real essential scholar in the Reform movement, modern Jewish scholar. So let us move then to the big questions of the day. Now, I did send these out to some of you, but not necessarily all of you. So sorry about that, but we can think about them here. Here's an opportunity for you to do a little sharing. So you can unmute if you'd like, or stay muted. Either way, would be an interesting opportunity for us to hear a little bit about how you understand your faith, which means maybe you believe in God, maybe you're not sure, maybe you don't believe in God, maybe you have some other way of thinking or believing. We'd like to know a little bit more about how you understand your faith, and then how you feel your faith connects to your understanding of traditional Judaism. Of course, that can be a broad question as well, could be answered in any number of different ways. And then where do you think your faith fits within the stated principles of Reformed Judaism, which I also sent out, and hopefully have a copy here because I can throw those up if you'd like.
Rabbi, that I got. I didn't get this.
Interesting. Okay. Well, think of the questions and let's see here. I'm looking for.
And I've kind of restated those questions into one question, which is in the chat box.
Fine. So you can look at the chat box, but I am going to look for. Oh, brother. Okay. think about it for a second. If you want to write it down, spend a minute. Why don't you do that? Jot it down or think about it for a minute. I'm going to locate a text that will be useful for us. Stop share here for a minute and go back to this. Oh, here it is. All right. Here are the statements of principles, including about God. So do you see that? God, where it says, we affirm the reality and oneness, even as we may differ in our understanding of the divine presence. So that would help you answer the question about how your faith ideas might comport with Reform Judaism. So let me just make sure. Can everybody see this text here in front of you? Okay. Take a minute or two to compose your thoughts, and then we'll share a little bit.
So if,
And also put stuff in the chat box if you'd like.
and speaking of the chat box, if for some reason you cannot see the statement of principles that the rabbi has put on his screen, I have also added it to the chat box.
Thank you, Cassandra.
Click on it, it'll open up in another window, or at least it should.
Okay. All right, let's have a little chat. Feel free to continue writing some ideas down. You can put stuff in the chat box. You can raise your hand and answer the question. Let's hear a little bit about how you perceive your faith and the extent to which you think it comports with traditional Judaism. That's a very wide open question, I think, on some level. So whatever you come up with will be useful for our conversation. And then to the extent that you can answer this question, how it fits within these Reform principles, let's have a listen.
Rabbi, Joy wants to know if 1999 was the last time a platform was released. And that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Do you?
Yes.
Yes?
The last official platform was in 1999. And we've been building on this ever since. Incidentally, a fun fact for us at Emmanuel, 1937, the Columbus platform was put into motion by our own Felix Levy, who presided over the Central Conference of American Rabbis, as did Herman Schallman of blessed memory. We're very fortunate to have not one, but two rabbis who preside over the CCAR. And Felix Levy was the deciding vote in the 37 Columbus platform. So there's more to it here. We can see here. So the 99 platform was ratified at the Pittsburgh Convention, where the first platform was forged like 100 years earlier. Just looking up that. Actually, Cassandra, maybe you can look that up to double check.
The Pittsburgh platform?
The first one, 1885. So almost a little over 100 years later. Let's put that back there. No, let's put that there. Okay. All right. So, all right, let's have a listen. Who wants to share? Devorah, please.
my faith, I wrote it down. My faith is personal and particular. I'm not a big fan of the depiction of God in parts of the Bible, especially the vindictive, knock him off, Aaron's sons,
Right.
the guy who put his hand on the ark and got zapped and stuff like that.
Yeah. This is the story of Nadav and Abihu, who bring a Eish Sarah, strange fire,
Yep.
to the Mizbeach, the altar, and God is upset with them for violating the rules. And there are any number of commentaries that reflect on the sort of the rationale or the intentionality of the two young priests. And the sad tale is they didn't live beyond this critical mistake that they made. And some of us feel it's a terrible outcome. Others will argue that God, a revolutionary God, was not in the mood for fooling around.
I have a question for
For me,
Devorah.
I find it very troublesome, like Devorah, just in case it's not clear. Joy, please.
Devorah, what do you mean by personal? When you say personal, I believe in a personal God.
Because I became Jewish because it was personal. I was going to church when I was 11 and a half. I was going to communion. And as I was walking up for communion, someone spoke to me and said, "You don't have to do this." And I turned around and walked out, and I went back to my mom's house, and I talked to her because I'd been having trouble with Catholicism for 3 or 4 years. None of my grandparents were Catholic. My parents converted after they married in the Methodist Church, and I was raised Catholic. I was going to Catholic schools and having a lot of problem with the idea that only Catholics got into heaven. It's a very childish kind of thing, but it was giving me a lot of trouble. And I came home and I talked to my mom. As I said, I was 11 and a half. And my mom had already converted to Judaism, and I started studying. And I was converted on my 12th birthday. I had my mikveh on my 12th birthday.
So are you using the term it's personal, meaning that your reasons were personal, or are you using it? What I'm trying to ascertain is you hear people talk about a personal God. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Well, for me, it's personal. It's not like, I believe that God is there for everyone, but for me, it's personal, and it always has been. And it's very hard to talk about with especially Reform Jews. It's a little bit easier with more Orthodox Jews, but because mine is not a logical, thought out, procedural kind of a thing, it was more gut feeling. So
I just want to clarify something that you're saying, and invite other conversation and other personal reflections. So for you, your faith is a function of this deep, almost instinctive spirituality that is not necessarily formed by some concept you learned in Torah, like B'Tselem Elohim or something like this.
Although I found that learning that stuff later, I firmly believe that that's exactly how I see it.
Okay.
And it's a good way to operate, thinking that every person you look at is the face of God.
Okay.
And why can't we remember that?
So, B'Tselem Elohim, by the way, being created in God's image, concept we learn in the beginning of Torah in the book of Genesis, first chapter. I think that what I learned from you, Devorah, is that part of this theological conversation comes from a very native, personal place. Part of what you deem to be your spiritual intuition, if you will. And I think
Yes.
a lot of people can identify with that. The thing is that as you become more aware of various teachings that do resonate for you, right? B'Tselem Elohim is a key concept, not only in traditional Judaism, but in Reform Judaism. A key concept that shapes the way we think of our intuitive understandings and gives it form. Gives you
Yes.
something to talk about beyond that intuitive, well, I just feel it in my gut, which is great. But I do think that the power of study does expose us to ideas that then give us language on how to formulate our intuitions. Good.
Yes.
Who else has something to share? And you don't have to share if you don't want to. It's an invitation, not an expectation.
I'll share a little bit.
Sure, Joy.
I would say my belief in God is evolving. And I asked about personal God because I struggle with that. I don't really know, or I've never had that experience. I think I intellectually understand what it is. I come by my spirituality, actually, and I hope this is not too much information for people, through a 12-step program for overeating. And so the concept they call a higher power of God is very much a part of that. And it's something that I struggled with for a long time, and it's within the last maybe year, not even quite that I actually have come to internalize much more a sense of something greater than myself that maybe one day I can even have a relationship with. I'd have to go and look for them exactly, but there were certainly things in this platform that really resonated with me. We respond to God through public and private prayer, study. There was something about nature.
Is the thing still up on the screen?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just trying to peruse it. And I do, I mean, for many years, the smiting and smoting, as I call it, in the Torah was really a turnoff to me. It's very disturbing. But I've also come to understand or I've come to believe that God, well, I don't know how to reconcile that piece of it. So, like a lot of people, I just kind of chose to ignore it. But I also have been wondering, and I'm going to throw this out there because I say this to people and they all think I'm kind of crazy, but if we are created in an image of God, and we all know that as humans, we make lots of mistakes and do some things that are not so wonderful. Does that mean God also makes mistakes and is not always so wonderful? I mean, certainly in the Torah, it appears that. And that way of thinking of it, I actually find comforting.
So that's a complex question, and there's no pat answers. But I would take us back to a conversation some of us had around Yom HaShoah, and that I've been thinking a lot about, and that is the extent to which the Shoah, the Holocaust, shattered the covenant between us and God. That there was a brokenness, because theoretically, if you fulfill the commandments, here's a traditional theology. If you fulfill the commandments, then you should receive and expect God to reward you. The Torah makes that extremely clear.
Right.
Fulfill mitzvot, gain blessing. Don't fulfill mitzvot, don't gain blessings. In fact, you might gain curses. It's clear. It's a theistic theology with God in the center. It's a lot of reward and punishment. And it's a challenge to those who have lived a life of virtue and feel somehow betrayed in a setting like the Shoah, full of radical evil. Now, interestingly enough, it says here, as part of Reformed theology, we continue to have faith that in spite of unspeakable evils committed against our people and the sufferings endured by others, the partnership of God and humanity will ultimately prevail. And one of the reasons why people are confident that this partnership will prevail is that there's something in the brokenness of the original covenant that ultimately gives us a chance to take a deep breath and reset and not look at God as so perfect and not look at ourselves as so bound by reward and punishment. And that somehow in that brokenness, we find the covenant and God more lovable. That's the invitation. That's the invitation. Have you ever been in a situation where you've been, you've been chastened, or you've been humbled, or you've survived a very difficult situation, and somehow you just feel stronger as a result of it?
Mm-hmm.
You feel more resilient. Well, somehow or another, despite the broken covenant, there are people, and this is the thinking of Rabbi Irving Greenberg, there are people who have looked at that brokenness and said, well, I still believe, and I'm going to recommit myself to living through this covenant, even if it's broken. I'm going to use it to liberate myself and the world from the world's problems, from poverty, from anger, from hatred, from other scourges that make it hard for us to thrive. This is out of that brokenness, we end up feeling better about ourselves and our capacity to make a difference, and God is part of that difference making. Sort of ironic. And of course, some people felt after the Shoah, what? That God was dead. There's no God to love here. I don't love God. I don't even believe in God. God doesn't even exist, because how could God exist if all of these people perished? That is an outcome as well. But Reformed Judaism calls us to try and live within that broken covenant and see an ironic wholeness in the whole experience. Does this make sense to you? It's kind of paradoxical.
It's very helpful to me.
Okay, good. All right, I want to jump into some more text here. So let's stop sharing. I don't think I can just transfer from one text to the next. So we'll get back to our slides. Sorry about that. Let's see, we want to do that. And let's go here.
Am I on everybody's main screen?
No.
Hang on. We're going to. Do you see something that says Reform Platform number 1?
Yes.
Okay, so here you can turn off your, you can mute yourselves, because I'm going to kind of work through this. By the way, I'm going to try and take us to the top of the hour, and anything we don't finish, we'll pick up the next time, okay? Kind of like we did today. We reviewed a little bit from last time, and we'll pick up, because I don't want to go past the hour. I want you to feel like it's a nice, tidy 60-minute experience, and you go off to dinner or whatever, and then we'll have this on the calendar, and we'll get back to the conversation. All
Rabbi?
right? Short and sweet.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I can't join you on Sunday the 10th. Because I have kids I tutor.
What time did we have the class?
11 o'clock.
Right. We can adjust that, I think. I think we can adjust that.
Yeah, we'll take care of that.
Okay. So a couple things to concentrate on here. Firstly, Reformed Judaism is built around three key cornerstones. One is God, the second is Torah, and the third is Israel. This is like an important triangle of concepts, of ideas, of realities that mark our priorities as a movement. God, Torah, and Israel. There is a second complementary platform that introduces three other ideas that we'll see are related to the first set, God, Torah, and Israel. The second set, the second platform, rests on creation, revelation, and redemption. Incidentally, just kind of standing on one foot here, the order, creation, revelation, redemption, does anybody know where that plays out in, say, our literature? In our prayers, right? What prayer follows the Baruch Hu? What concept?
Creation.
Creation, right? Mari Varavim Yotzer Or. What about revelation? What are the revelation prayers? Revelation prayer comes before what significant prayer in the prayer book? The Shema, right? Revelation, we have the Ava Rabbah in the morning and the Avat Olam at night. And finally, Geula, redemption, comes after what? The Ve'ahavta. We usually focus on the Michamocha. Michamocha is part of the redemption prayer, or blessing, to be exact. So these platforms are complementary because they bring each of the concepts together. So, for example, we know from the outset, Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, when God began to create heaven and earth, the very first thing we know in our Torah is that God is creator. This is emphasized in our modern platform. Joy, could you read this for us, please? Oh, unmute.
We regard with reverence all of God's creation and recognize our human responsibility for its preservation and protection.
All right. So here in the very essence of our Torah, the very first verse of the Torah, Reshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, that God is a creative God and creates beautiful creation, and it is incumbent upon us as human beings to recognize the beauty of this creation and to invest responsibility in taking care of it, preserving it, protecting it. We are Shomrei Adama, we are guardians of the land. And in that practice, we model God's essence as creator. And of course, there are other things that we do to cultivate creativity in the image of God and enable us to recognize our human responsibility. I think art reflects a creative, a very meaningful and creative capacity. I think those who are healing, whether it's people with COVID-19 or other diseases, physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, there's a creative process that enables us, if we use it and we recognize the creative God, that we can serve the world and the creative process through our own creative responsibility, our own healing responsibility, our own aesthetic, inspirational responsibility. And thereby the world is maintained and sustained. So what do you think makes this a plausible theology? I have a hint for you. Who's been to like Yosemite or the equivalent, some magnificent natural space? And how would you describe your experience there?
Awesome.
Awesome.
Inspiring.
Say again?
Awe-inspiring.
Awe-inspiring. Thank you. Abraham Joshua Heschel spoke of radical amazement. And I think he had great natural settings in mind, great, powerful, awe-inspiring moments in mind. What makes God as creator plausible Reformed theology is this experiential amazement that enables us to transcend what otherwise would be very mundane.
The other thing that I experience, probably one of the only other things I experience besides nature as awesome, is the blowing of the shofar.
Yeah. Well, what is the blowing of the shofar but a form of music? And music has a way of transcending the inexplicable.
So do sunrises and sunsets.
Sunrises and sunsets, witnessing the birth of a child or a grandchild, or knowing that children are born into the world. These are awe-inspiring, in some ways inexplicable experiences that raise our spirit, that bring us to great inspiration. And so knowing that happens, and knowing that there's this creative energy in the universe that supports and sustains this awe-inspiring reality, does open us up to the plausibility of a creative God. Now, what are the challenges? What are the challenges that come with this theology, in your opinion? Are there intellectual or moral challenges that make it a little hard for this to be plausible?
Right now, the COVID virus.
Say more.
I have a lot of friends who are convinced that the Messiah is around the corner because the COVID virus is an agent of change, and this portends the advent of the Mashiach.
Okay. Right. So, a little hard sometimes to understand God in any level, creative or otherwise. Right? I think there's problems with God as creator. There's problems with God as revealer and redeemer. When it comes to these notions that somehow this is here to prepare us for the Messiah, to chasten us properly for whatever, assimilation or some other way of thinking about Judaism, much like the Holocaust, right? Was somehow a lesson. I don't believe that for a second. Just as I'm not sure that we have a COVID virus because we need to prepare the way for the Messiah. I think we have a COVID virus because viruses happen and we respond to them either well or not well, or somewhere in between, and people get sick in between those cracks, right? And we struggle going forward to make sure everybody's well and stays well, and we have to find new and creative ways to make our lives matter, right? But it may be problematic for us to have reverence for a God who creates such a devastating natural disaster, if you will.
So then, and this is sort of where I get stuck sometimes. So if God is the creator, is God also the destroyer?
Well, that's an interesting question, right? So here, that's a powerful moral challenge. It's all fine and good, until someone gets hurt. Oh, that's amazing. We have a creative God and a loving God, and then it works until God is not so loving and can be very destructive. So here's some other things, above and beyond what may seem like senseless violence or senseless destruction, be it by natural disasters or disease. This is right at the top of the list of problems, moral mostly. But intellectual challenges come in the form of, how do you prove the existence of God in the first place? And what do you do about the problem of creation and, 6 days of creation, right? Science really doesn't support 6 days of creation. How about millions and millions of years of creation?
It doesn't say how long a day was, Rabbi.
Well, that's true, but we don't have discernible proof that 6 days means like 6 million years, say. Or
Does it matter?
No, I'm not saying it does, but I think for some of us, it presents an intellectual hurdle.
I think Ben has his hand up and maybe wants to contribute.
That's fine. Ben, do me a favor. If we're not tuned into the hand there, just chime in, okay?
Okay. I was just going to say that based on my understanding of things, it is people destroy people who do not reflect the light of God, as opposed to God destroying.
Okay. Well, look, definitely places responsibility for life's darkness in the lives of those who are evil, who lack God's light in them. It's not God's fault. I would say to that, if we embrace the notion of a broken covenant, which makes a lot of moral, intellectual, emotional sense post-Holocaust, we might understand that somehow or another that while God may not be culpable for the hatred of Adolf Hitler, for example, the covenant couldn't survive that hatred and became shattered by it and required those surviving the Shoah to rethink the covenant, but to understand its brokenness. So in a sense, it does lend a vulnerability to God that comports better with reality. When you look at a world that's broken, you look at the world through the lens of COVID-19, it looks like a very broken world. Above and beyond those who are doing their best work to heal it. So, what other issues might there be? Well, I think we've covered them. The notion that a creative God who was so involved in shaping the world that would not be somehow connected or present or involved with discernible divine purpose in the Shoah, for many is a deal breaker. And I understand that. We want God to interfere in human evil. And if God doesn't, then that's a problem. I'm not saying everybody thinks that way, but this is certainly a hurdle when we think about God as creator. All right, let's take a look at the time. We have 8 minutes, so let's see if we can't get through this next piece. Now, do you see this slide talks about the revelation of God? And this is Torah. Torah is the embodiment of God's revelation. From a Reformed perspective, we see this revelation not as a singular revelation at Sinai, but as an ongoing revelation that had a historical connection to Sinai, had a public connection to Sinai. That is, our people stood and received Torah, Matan Torah. They received the gift of Torah. They received the revelation. They impressed that revelation upon their hearts. And in so doing, committed themselves to a life of emulating God, which in many ways is a pathway to loving God, by the way. So, key texts, very important. Here at the beginning of the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, Vayidaber Elohim et kol hadvarim ha'ela lemor. God spoke all these words saying. So the revelation is a function of God's language, and the language is captured in Torah. Now, where do we see this next reading? It's actually an amalgamation of these two readings, and I'll read just the relevant parts where we hear this. Tell me where you hear this. V'zot haTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai biyad Moshe.
When we lift up the Torah.
Right. This is the teaching that Moses set before the Israelites at the Eternal's bidding through Moses. What is sort of essential to this amalgamation of texts? What does it say about the teaching? Who is instrumental in the teaching?
God.
God. But what's key here is God's bidding through Moses. Right? Who does the setting forth of the teaching? Moses.
Yeah.
What does that say about humanity's connection to the revelation?
Through Moses?
Yeah, or through any of us.
Through people?
Yes. Yes. The revelation comes as a function of God's language. Revelation of God through Torah, through God's language. Vayidaber, and God spoke. But that's not all. At least from a Reformed perspective, and I would say in many ways from a non-Orthodox perspective, this notion that we lift Torah into view based on a Torah asher sam Moshe, Torah in the name of Moses. And it's through God's bidding, it's through God's inspiration that Moses comes to a deep awareness and then shares that awareness with us. So in that spirit, Ben, will you read, "We cherish the truths"?
Yes, we cherish the truths revealed in Torah, God's ongoing revelation to our people, and the record of our people's ongoing relationship with God.
All right. So have just a few minutes here. Ongoing revelation. What do you think? What makes this a plausible theology?
It's not fixed, it's not static.
Okay. So for many of us, especially pertinent to concerns mentioned here by both Devorah and Joy, there are things in the Torah that are very troublesome. Whether it is slavery or misogyny or the violence that befalls teenagers trying to figure out the proper pathway to holiness, zapping them into oblivion may not be in our minds, the very best approach to helping them develop their skill and their kavod, their respect, their yirah, their awe. So that part is challenging. Almost done. Almost done. Getting back in for dinner. 3 minutes.
Me too.
All right. But the fact that things evolve and shift, and that revelation can unfold over time and evolve over time, makes it more plausible for us to recognize a Torah that, is growing with us. And in that growth, in that recognition, Torah becomes more plausible, and the theology that pushes the Torah forward is more plausible. But what are some of the issues? What are some of the problems?
Some people think it was codified back then and we're done. That's the way it is.
Okay, so there are those who don't feel like we have the authority to render the Torah more fully over time. But some more basic concerns that Professor Meyer brings to bear. Firstly, the whole notion of God and God's language. Right? Can we believe in a God that speaks in a human language? Is one of the big questions asked.
And how else would you talk to God?
Well, right. But I mean, who exactly is certain, that this language is actually happening? Right? That can be a challenge for some of us, an intellectual challenge. And how do you reconcile revelation, whether singular or ongoing, when you have this notion that there are multiple authors? Reform Judaism identifies with biblical criticism and the notion that there are multiple schools of thought responsible for Torah. So how do you reconcile human authorship with divine authorship, or even divine inspiration? Another tough question. And of course, we've talked about this already. To the extent that there are morally abhorrent texts, some of which we've talked about, right? Some of which we haven't. Professor Meyer talks about subordinate status of women, toleration of slavery, the wiping out of nations living in Canaan. We haven't brought that up. That's a big problem to this very day, right? And how do we reconcile these biblical teachings with establishing a modern state in Israel? The sacrificial practices are seen as primitive to some, clearly bloody and grotesque, and that there are commandments that seem meaningless, purposeless, like shotness. You know what shotness is?
Yeah, mixing linen and wool.
Wool and linen. And last but not least, what about our notion of autonomy and the notion that we want to choose what we're doing, not necessarily be forced to obey? I think sometimes the notion of being commanded will limit some sense of freedom, and that can be a challenge. All right, we're going to pause here. Thank you for your time. We will pick up and talk more about redemption as a way of reviewing this particular lesson and then moving on to the next lesson. All righty, blessings to you.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Can you send those slides to me? Because I
will
didn't.
send you the slides. I will
Thank
send you the rest of the slides. And stay well, everybody. Blessings. Struggle on.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, Ben. Thank you.